Let's take a closer look at the economic situation in Lebanon then. The economy is still in tatters following 15 years of war, which ended in 1990. Lebanon now has one of the world's highest public debt burdens. It stands at around 150% of GDP. Well, that's led to crumbling infrastructure and a real lack of jobs. Unemployment for people under 35 years of age is at 37%. Economic growth has been stifled by regional conflicts, and Lebanon has struggled to support an influx of 1.5 million Syrian refugees. Several foreign governments and donors last year pledged $11 billion in financing for Lebanon's infrastructure, but that hasn't been handed over because it was on the condition there needed to be economic reforms. Joining me now is Rami Khouri, a senior public policy fellow and professor at the American University of Beirut. Good to have you with us. So these protests started over taxes. Is it still about taxes at this point? Has it spiraled into something bigger?
Well, they started really over accumulated anger by citizens all over the country about the fact that their government has not only mismanaged the economy and seen a decline in public services for the last 15 or 20 years and an increase in perceived corruption, but also the government just doesn't listen to the citizens when they complain, either peacefully or through elections or through street demonstrations. So it was pent-up cumulative anger over decades that finally burst. And it was what made it burst was the idea that the government that was responsible for all these problems simply came back with the same policy of say, well, let's raise taxes on middle class and lower income people and other people in the country, and let's get the citizens to pay for our mistakes. And they won't do that anymore. It's identical to almost all the demonstrations you're seeing in Jordan and Iraq, in Morocco and Algeria and Sudan, all over the Middle East. It's quite extraordinary that about a dozen Arab countries have seen regular demonstrations, weekly, daily, monthly, across the entire region for the last 7 or 8 years, nonstop. And that's really the heart of the problem. Citizens who refuse to continue to be ignored and mistreated and exploited by their own government.
Is a cross-confessional movement being born here? This protest doesn't seem to be following the usual sort of sectarian lines.
This is one of the significant things about this protest. There's been many protests in Lebanon over the years, and recently, every few weeks people protest for good reason. The difference this time is, first of all, it's all over the country. It's not limited to Beirut and a couple of cities. Second of all, you're getting a disproportionately large number of protests in the south, in the Shia majority areas, and people have been publicly criticizing their leadership, especially the ML movement. That's unusual. And the third thing is the intensity of the protests and the outspoken way in which people are making their demands met. So there's a qualitative difference this time from previous demonstrations. The problem is that the strength of the oligarchic system, the 18 confessional groups that have power enshrined in the Constitution and the Ta'if agreements and all other recent agreements, that system has been so strong and it has held together despite all the protests, all the movements that have tried to bring about real reform. The political power elite has been able to stay in power, and we'll see if that continues this time or if they give in. The troubling thing is that the political leaders who have spoken out, including the Prime Minister and Hezbollah and the socialist movement and others, they've all basically said, I'm for reform, I'm with the people, but it's the other politicians who won't compromise. So everybody's trying to pass the buck or pass the lira, and the lira, by the way, is losing value every day. So it's really a pretty gruesome performance by the political class, and the citizens simply won't sit around and take it anymore because their daily life needs are increasingly difficult and more expensive to meet.
All right, thank you for your analysis on that, Rami Khouri.